I'm just, thrilled to be here with you. I will say that this has been I've been getting educated in real time by Endeavor and your team, and there is so much happening here. I feel that from the outside looking in, Greece has really shifted its sort of standing, or the perception of Greece. I know you've sort of called it earlier on in time the sort of sick child of Europe, and now it's very much seen as a welcome, wonderful partner in the EU, and I think that's a huge credit to you. There's, of course, a long way to go, and the Greek ecosystem and innovation is a big part of that. So I wanted to talk to you primarily about that today, and then if there's time, I would love to talk to you about, some of the other headwinds that you're facing and trying to overcome, including your demographics and what's happening in the U.S. right now with the tariff war sort of creating all kinds of new and fun uncertainties. So I guess as a starting point, maybe we could talk a little bit about this transformation that's underway. And, I love the slogan, and I've seen the signs, Innovation Nation, so clever. Tell me a little bit about the hard data to support that there is a transformation underway.
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this discussion. Thank you for being here in Greece. You're incredibly influential when it comes to the international tech world. And as Panos said, I think the Greek story is worth spreading, in the sense that what's been happening in Greece over the past years was not obvious. But it is, I think, an important success story, and there is still significant room to grow. So if you think of Greece and where Greece was 10 years ago, on the precipice of being thrown out of the euro, a country with deeply sort of problematic public finances, and a general perception that there wasn't really a promising future, especially for the young people or the talented people or the entrepreneurs. I think we've been able to change that perception, and that in itself has been incredibly important. I'm not going to talk about the overall state of the economy, but when we were looking back in 2019 in terms of which sectors can we really grow in Greece, we made a very conscious decision that the Greek growth story could not just be about tourism or hospitality. We're a wonderful country, and tourism is incredibly important, but we needed to diversify. And as someone who's had some experience in tech investing, in the sense that I was a venture capitalist before I went into politics. So I founded the first incubator back in 2001, at a time when all these ideas were still quite foreign to Greece. But now I think the stars are aligned, and if you look at the overall success in terms of the VC funds that are present here, the amount of capital raised by startups, the number of startups that are being created, and in general something which you can't really measure, but I'm sure you pick it up, the general buzz of the ecosystem. Something is really happening here, and something is, and why not? I mean, have tech be 10% of our economy? This is perfectly doable in the next years, and we are just catalysts, in the sense that we want to create the proper conditions and let then the ecosystem flourish. And I think that the conditions have been put in place. And I'm not just talking about the overall political stability, the fact that Greece has a promising future ahead of it. I'm talking about a government that from the very first day put in place a right incentive structure, from things like stock options, angel investor, a favorable non-dom regime for people to actually return to Greece. And we're leveraging our strength. And what is our strength? Basically, our tremendous human talent pool. And there are two types of talent pools. There are the people in Greece. We still have a very good public education system that is producing excellent graduates, especially from our technical universities. But we also have an incredible asset, which is our diaspora. The diaspora, we've always been talking about how can we engage more with it, but nothing really had been happening. But for the first time, now we see the diaspora being reconnected to Greece. We see people returning to Greece. We see people investing in Greece, and especially in a space such as in AI, Greece is overrepresented. As Panos said, when it comes to AI, when it comes to crypto, we have amazing talent. So how do we build the bridge to bring these people back. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about our AI strategy, because I think there we really have a very compelling story to tell. And the idea is always punch above our weight, make sure we create a system that an ecosystem that is sustained and that can grow with its own energy, and make sure that we also use technology in general to leapfrog and to catch up, not just to catch up, but to actually do better than many European countries. I was speaking to the new German Chancellor, who's a good friend, and when I went to see him in Berlin before the elections, he told me that he's setting up a ministry for digitization. Because the truth is that Germany is behind Greece now, when you look at how digital the state is. So these were all decisions that were taken some years ago, but now we see the impact. So technology, and in particular AI, is also an incredible tool to improve public service delivery. So this is not just about what is a startup community doing, is what we can do, how we can be clients of the services that are being developed, and how do we also, as government, have more of a startup mentality. And what does it mean to have a startup mentality if you run a government, which is not necessarily obvious, but sometimes we sort of can be quite progressive when it comes to these ideas.
Well, I love your background. It is very Silicon Valley-esque. As you mentioned, you started a venture fund, an incubator, you worked in finance, in consulting, Harvard, Stanford. I do think that it gives you a fresh perspective compared with many other politicians. So there's a lot to unpack. Starting with the diaspora, I mean, I encounter so many really brilliant Greek Americans in the Bay Area, among other places. But what are you doing to, I guess, keep that brain power here? Obviously, this is something that you've answered a million times, but there was a lot of people who left during the economic crisis. I know some are coming back, but maybe beyond tax breaks, what are some of the sort of plans you put in place? Tax
breaks are there. They're not insignificant, 50% discount on your income tax for 7 years, but people are not going to come back for a tax break. They will come back if they have a good job opportunity, if they feel that they can do something which is rewarding, and they feel they can actually, grow their business in Greece. So I think one of the challenges, and this is not just a Greek challenge, I think it's a European challenge. We talk a lot in Europe about fostering entrepreneurship and how don't we lose, our talent to the US. And the challenges there are very, very clear. We have a vibrant, VC scene now in Greece, but we also need later stage capital. We need sort of more, regular private equity to be able to finance these companies without them selling out to US companies. We need to give these companies and the startups who are here access to a true European single market. Because when you talk about the European single market, it's there on paper, but if you look at how difficult it is for many of you to do business in many European countries, it's not really there. So simplification, what we call this famous 28th regime, what could it mean to have one European registration that will allow you to do business in all European countries? I think this is absolutely critical in order for the companies to feel that they can grow. I mean, the startups here, they're not just interested in the Greek market, but the European market is big. So we want to make sure that this works. And then, of course, what we call, it's a technical term, but very important, what we call capital markets union, savings and investment union. Why is it in Europe that we still export our savings to the US? What does it mean for a company to list in a European stock exchange rather than, or even in Greece? I'm very happy that now we see the Greek stock market again picking up. And for younger companies, an exit through a listing on the Athens Stock Exchange was inconceivable years ago. Now it could be an option. So this is it's a Greek challenge, but it's also a European challenge. Our advantage is that we have the talent, and we're building the bridges, with the proper incentives for these people to actually start, looking at Greece with a different mindset. And when we wrote our AI strategy document, we basically spoke to top people from abroad, some VC, top VC investors in the Valley, some top AI research, and we asked them, look, AI is here, we're a middle-sized country, how do we position ourselves in this? And I think we've come up with very, very interesting ideas in terms of how we can actually leverage AI, but also areas where we need to be very careful.
Well, I do think AI is going to be the great equalizer. It's certainly disrupting everything where I live. I did want to ask, you mentioned leapfrogging Germany, which is not the first time I've heard you say that, and I think it's sort of interesting because I do think, Berlin had, at least for some number of years, sort of had the mantle of the, tech hub of Europe. I think that's maybe gone back to London. But can you talk a little bit more about that and I guess in a more concrete way, where you think you've sort of advanced? Because they have much more money to spend than you do. I think something like 7x more.
Leapfrogging Germany is a term I would use very, very carefully because Germany is a superpower. But I'm careful when I talk about digital services and about how digital the state is. There, I think we have really made big progress. Why did this happen? I think because we took a decision in 2019 at the beginning of our first term to set up a ministry for digital transformation with horizontal powers over all other ministries and with the ability to also get all the data and deliver digital services. So we broke down the silos. Every ministry on its own, every ministry looking at its own data. What does it mean to actually have a more horizontal structure? In the beginning we had reactions, but then all the line ministers realized, there is an incentive here. If I team up with the Ministry of Digital Infrastructure to deliver a new service online, this is actually good for me as a minister because it makes people's lives easier and because people in general like to have their lives simplified. Then we had COVID, where we run a completely digitized vaccination. I was, friends of mine from the US were sending me little paper slips in terms, that never existed in Greece. There was no paper involved in our vaccination certificates. Then we had, then we took some important initiatives at the European level in terms of, vaccination certificates in order for people to travel. So we also came up with ideas that were interesting at the European level. And now, of course, the challenge is, okay, digitization is, 1.0, but AI is the future. And what does AI for government really mean? So, which are the, the services or the processes that you can actually help, do a productivity leap when it comes to AI? And this is exactly what we're looking at now. For example, we ran a pilot project which went extremely well. It actually made it with Microsoft and OpenAI. Microsoft really publicized it, where we had, an AI tool screen contracts, and basically it took notaries now and our officials at the land registry, whereas it took them 2 hours to check the contract, the contract has been pre-read with little notifications. It takes them 10 minutes now to do a job that took 2 hours. So there are lots of sort of processes where AI can actually help you streamline the business of government. And then we started looking at verticals. Okay, which are the areas where AI can really be critical? For example, civil protection, where things such as flood prevention, fire prevention are incredibly important, and we have lots of data. And the other area I really care about, where I think we really want to be leaders, is health. AI and health. There, we don't just have the talent, but we have another great advantage, and that is we have well-curated data sets which are centrally managed. So you have a country of 10 million, we already have a digital health app, and we have good quality data. We're running lots of general population screening tests for preventive diseases. So this gives us a lot of input. So this is, and there I'm speaking both from the perspective of the state as a client, but also giving access and opportunities to companies to develop new applications that they could test in Greece and then possibly export abroad. And the third segment, which is fascinating, is defense. Why should you all care about defense? I think because we're going to spend a lot of money on defense as Europe. We want critical autonomy, strategic autonomy. The defense landscape is changing. This is no longer just going to be about planes, tanks. I mean, this is all going to be much more digitally and AI driven. And what we've done, which is really innovative, for the first time, I mean, we have an innovation center at the Ministry of Defense that can actually test prototypes. So we can write a small contract, do a small test, and so we are the clients of the technologies. And then we, of course, want to make sure that we give our startups the opportunity to publicize what they do with us, and then create a European, possibly open up a European market. So this is sort of an area I would really focus on if I were now wearing my investor hat, because there's a lot of money and there's a willingness to think outside the box and not just talk about the big defense contracts. These will always be there. We will always have to buy ships and planes, but there's more, much more than that. And there we're also looking at the community to come with solutions and ideas to us. So this is no longer, a Department of Defense that thinks, maybe in terms of 20th century war. We want to hear about ideas and about projects and about solutions and how you can add value to what it is we want to do.
It's all fascinating. And I was just talking to Dimitrios Kostas of Delian, and he was saying it does seem like a really special opportunity right now. His biggest competitor is Anduril, but if their company can compete on software, they can scale up much more quickly than has ever been possible historically. I feel like there's an opportunity to displace incumbents that we haven't seen before. So that's really
so this, you really kill two birds with one stone. We do our job because we can have access to cutting-edge technology. The Department of Defense, and at the same time, we offer companies the opportunity to work with us through a more flexible arrangement, and do things here. Really, the story of defense, it's been a big disappointment. We've spent like almost 300 billion over the past 30 years, and what has been left really in the domestic defense industry? Very little. I don't want to make the same mistake in the age of AI. So I know that if I'm going to spend 28 billion over the next 12 years, which is our plan, I want at least to make sure that there is a booming defense industry, from the nuts and bolts, the more traditional stuff, to the cutting edge technology. So we have the talent. It would be a huge pity if we don't take advantage of this.
I did want to spend a few more minutes talking to you about talent. One of my questions is very, very self-centered, self-interested, but it is about the country's stance on repatriating people of Greek ancestry. So I happen to know, even in my own family, people with multiple degrees who speak Greek fluently, who would love to come back here and get dual citizenship. One cousin has spent a 25-year journey toward that objective, and she's there now. But I just wonder, is that something that you're focused on, making that easier?
Yes, the citizenship, laws are maybe sometimes cumbersome, but if you can prove your Greek lineage, we want to make it easier for people to get Greek citizenship. But we also want to make sure that we bring people from abroad who are not Greek citizens, who are not interested in becoming Greek citizens, to make sure that we give them an opportunity to work here. So this idea of tech visas, we're looking at making sure we can bring in talent. I know that we have startups with Indian CEOs here. So there are certain countries we really want to focus on where we have natural synergies, and India would be one of them. I just saw the CEO of Indigo. They're going to start a non-stop flight between Delhi and Athens within the next year. So this is a global war for talent, and we need to make it easy for either Greek talent to return to Greece, or for people who can live anywhere and can work out of anywhere to work here. And then, of course, and this is also a story I want to make. This is not just about Athens. We have, a new hub, Thesintech, which is going to be built in Thessaloniki. You have tech companies emerging in cities such as Yanina, in Iraklion, because you have good public universities there. So if you have good tech schools, the companies are going to go where they can actually recruit. So this should also be a story about regional development. It doesn't have to be that everyone has to be in Athens. There are other places where you can actually grow businesses. I know that one defense company is setting up, a small drone facility in Chania, which happens to be my hometown. They did it without telling me anything, and I don't think it played any role that I am from Chania. But but I said, that's where we found a good plot of land. We have talent. We're going to do it. We're going to do it there.
Chania is one of my favorite places. I did want to ask, you mentioned the visas. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you found to be most effective. You've got this talent visa, this tech visa, and then the golden visa, which I think is interesting, but I do wonder how you make sure you're sort of inviting innovators to the country and not people who are just trying to buy a European address and probably closer to retirement.
Look, how did this, this golden visa started with the idea of, bringing in money basically for the real estate sector. So at some point we realized that, look, these people are, sometimes are crowding out, the Greeks who want to buy a house. So we significantly raised the threshold for real estate investment. But we said something which is basic. Look, if you want to put $250,000 in a startup investment, you can get, you can essentially get a golden visa. So instead of investing it in real estate, invest it in a company. I don't think we have anything to lose. It seems to me that, yes, the risk is always there, but I don't think that anyone would necessarily throw away 250,000 sort of euros without doing some basic due diligence where they're actually putting their money. So it's an additional way to get some seed capital into Greece.
I also wanted to ask you, I've heard it sort of, people half kidding, half not kidding, that you need a law degree to navigate the laws here because they've been changing so much. And it makes it a little bit harder for foreign investors to sort of feel that they are on solid ground investing in Greece. So can you address that concern?
Yeah, I think we're at a better state than we were, but we still, of course, there's still significant, room for improvement. I think if you talk to, for example, the big VC funds, international funds, they have difficulties making investments in Greece too. They have the infrastructure, the legal services, the sort of the certainty that contracts are going to be honored. I think that's something which is in place. Are there structural problems? Yes, which are general structural problems. We still need to accelerate justice across the board, and this is a big reform we're undertaking in our second term. This is not just related to investors. But I think overall, what I do consider sort of the most important aspect is, again, it's soft, but it's also quite tangible. Is this country moving in the right direction? If I'm going to invest in Greece, looking 3, 5, 7 years out, is there a macroeconomic risk? Is there a political risk? Is the general environment going to be conducive? And I think we can tick those boxes because we sorted out the macro situation. We have a significant primary surplus. We're borrowing much cheaper than the U.S. That's who would have, who would have, but the U.S. can afford to run big deficits. We can't. So, this fiscal discipline and this focus on reforms is here. We have an absolute majority. I think we have a good chance of winning the next election. So you come into a country and say, okay, I don't just look at the company, I look at the general context. Is this a stable country? Is this a country that's moving in the right direction? And the answer is yes. And I think investors have been voting with their feet, both in terms of the investors that are investing in our funds, in our startups, the big international investors that are looking at bigger companies, in terms of attracting foreign direct investment. We're doing quite well. And of course, we can always do better, but we know what we have to do to improve.
And do you think the country sort of broadly understands what you're doing here? Because it's inescapable. You have to move toward innovation, but the country is sort of, its national character is sort of more traditional, smaller businesses, family-owned businesses. So I wonder how you kind of square these competing interests.
I think that's a great question that you're asking. And yes, there is of course a divide when it comes to technology. But we want to also help small, medium sort of enterprises use technology to be more efficient because it's a tool for survival. And we run many programs to actually do that. We want sort of digital literacy programs it's always very moving when I go to some sort of community centers and I see older people, getting basic introductory courses in digital skills, because I went and asked this older lady and I said, why are you doing this? And I said, look, I want to be able to use my gov.gr or do a digital transfer on my own. I don't want to ask my sort of grandkid to do it for me. So there's a general push towards understanding that this is the future, and certainly the young generation is understanding it. And for me, the most fascinating aspect is the cultural change. You look at what's happening at schools. We have the junior achievement, competitions where we have so many initiatives in terms of, kids experimenting with ideas of how to set up a startup. We've sent robotics kids to all schools because we want to sort of encourage engineering. And basically, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the idea of setting up a company was very foreign to young graduates from university. We also had this taboo that universities is a very sort of leftist approach, that universities and the private sector need to be completely separated. That is also changing. You look at universities now, the framework, the research that they do, the startups that are emerging, the fact that companies have actually made it into the universities in the first place for Greece is a very big step. So the most encouraging thing is that you have more people interested in doing something on their own. 30 years ago, it would have been, I want to become a civil servant, or I want to become, a salaried employee. That's not the case. And as you said, technology is a great equalizer, and you never know where the next great idea is going to come from.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. I mean, it's obviously people can start companies much more readily, and scale them. And in a way, I sometimes wonder if Greece is sort of better positioned while things are happening in the background, because there is this sort of, the economy is still very dependent on sort of human relationship-driven businesses, which I think are going to become more critical as we go here. So Prime Minister, I guess for the last question, I just wanted to ask you about your legacy. So you're doing so much here. Obviously, you want to stay in power and continue on this path. 10 years and more into the future, what do you want people to sort of think about when they think about how you reshaped Greece?
Well, first of all, let me make a point about what you said, because I think it's critical. Again, if you look at the economy and the jobs that may disappear as a result of AI, having also a big service sector is not necessarily bad. As much as the Chinese would focus on so much on robots, I don't see robots replacing the hospitality sector anytime soon, whereas robots will replace a lot of manufacturing jobs. That's pretty clear to me that this is already happening. So in that sense, also having a big service sector is not necessarily bad in this changing. Look, I think I'm a pretty humble person, so the last thing I want to think about is, how will sort of history judge us all? What I know is that we still have 2 years in our term. We have, lots of work to do. What I want to make sure is that the progress we have made is irreversible. Whatever that means. This is not just a legal or constitutional question, it's also a cultural question. And of course, the big challenge is catch up with Europe, because we lost a lot of time. The crisis was so painful, it almost tore the country apart. And we essentially not only lost a decade, but we really, suffered enormously. So for me, the big challenge is to ensure that this progress is irreversible. It will continue to take place. We can't do miracles. We can't make up the lost ground in a couple of years. But I think we've broken out of the vicious cycle of the past. And I do see technology as a great opportunity, both for the private sector and for the government. So if there is an opportunity to make a big leap, rather than just moving in the right direction, it has to be what's happening in, especially in the world of AI. being fully aware of the fact that there are many risks that need to be managed. So in that sense, we need both a very positive story vis-a-vis AI, but also a very clear narrative, not just as Greece, but as Europe, the risks surrounding our democratic discourse, and what does it mean to be a well-functioning sort of democracy in an age of misinformation, bots, AI-driven, amplified messages, and of course, a topic I deeply care about, and that is the issues of mental health for children and teenagers in terms of what the impact is of them essentially growing up in a virtual world, and what will this mean, for their health, for the future of education, and I do think that there we are, especially in the U.S., engaged in a race to be bolder, faster, more powerful, and at some point I really take a step back and I think, do even the people who write these models understand what they will be capable of doing, or is it just the race to produce the next even more powerful version of the next model? So I think there, not just Greece, but Europe has a role to play as a balancing force, leveraging the tremendous opportunities of AI, but not forgetting that there is also another side to the coin, which we simply cannot ignore because companies just want to make more profits.
No, I completely agree. I'm glad that you're thinking about this. I'm glad the EU is thinking about this because obviously there's many other distractions in the U.S. and as you said, we're not focusing on enough. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to sit down with you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, and a great event. Thank you for having me.